Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the GEPRC CineKing. This is a 3 to 4S 2-inch Cinewhoop, however you can also get it as a 2S model. At first I thought they were trying to improve on the CinePro 4K, which is not just my favourite Cinewhoop, but it's actually one of my favourite models in general. And that's because despite its protectors, it flies like a legitimate freestyle micro that doesn't have all of the usual flight characteristics of a Cinewhoop, such as yaw washouts, because its weight distribution is spread out evenly over the model. The views of the video I made on the CinePro 4K are an indication of how good it is, so I'll add a card to the top right if you haven't already seen it. So, why do I think the CineKing isn't going to be better? I mean, the name suggests that it should be, and it's lighter than the CinePro 4K with a dry weight of 101 grams against the 130 grams of the CinePro. It's got the same 1105 5000 kV motors as well as the Emax 2-inch props. The protectors are the same as well, and if you're wondering why they are green, it's because the clear ones do turn green anyways after a few dives into the grass. And it's using the Cadex V1 Tarsier 4K camera. They've also squeezed the protectors closer into the frame so its footprint is smaller, but that's actually why it's not on the same level as the CinePro 4K, and it's priced lower to reflect that. In order to get the protectors closer to the frame, they've had to compromise on the components. Everything with a significant weight has been stacked on top of each other, including the LiPo, creating a weight imbalance, which is one of the reasons most Cinewhoops are only good for just cruising around. This extra space has allowed them to go for a dead cat configuration, but I don't think this is a good choice either. You see, the back motors are closer together, which means that they have to work harder to match the front motors, and that often results in the back motors getting hot. And while this is the case for most dead cat configurations, when you scale it down and have most of the weight in one place, I think it's a big sacrifice to get the model lighter, because I have a feeling that it's going to compromise the flight performance as well as efficiency. Its footprint technically isn't really that smaller than the CinePro 4K either. If you look at the front two protectors, they are only slightly narrower. So when it comes to hitting gaps, the CineKing doesn't have as much advantage as it appears. In order to get all of the main components in the middle of the model, they have downgraded the stack to the GEPRC 16x16 stable F411, which consists of a 4-in-1 12 amp BL Halley S ESC with a 25 volt 330 microfarad low ESR capacitor attached to the battery terminals, as well as an XT30 connector. And with these motors in this configuration, I'm not sure 12 amps is enough, so I'll have to see how that plays out. The entire stack is soft mounted, which is good to see. Above the 4-in-1 board we have an F4 flight controller with Betaflight on-screen display. You have to make sure that you have a short USB connector because there isn't a lot of room, and from my experience most 16x16 boards have a really weak USB port that can lift off the solder pads easily, so be careful with that. It's come flash with Betaflight 4.05 and the setup is pretty decent. I've only found one main issue. They've come up with their own PIDs, but it's on PID Profile 2, and out of the box PID Profile 1 was selected, which has Betaflight stock PIDs, so it will oscillate to the sky unless you change the PID profile through the on-screen display settings, so make sure that you do that. This is the plug and fly version, which has come with a servo connector, so I've plugged it into an XM Plus that has pins soldered to it. However, due to this dead cat configuration, it's difficult to find space for the receiver, so I've had to cable tie it to the bottom of the model, which is not ideal. It would fit inside the model if I chopped off the servo connector, but I like to reuse my receivers, and they do provide a 3D printed antenna holder as well as some straws, so it's not actually too bad mounting it like this. You can get it with a bunch of different receivers. I'll link to it in the video description so you can check out all of the different options. The VTX is controlled via the TRAMP protocol, leaving no spare UARTs for anything else other than your receiver, of course. But the VTX is power switchable from pit mode up to 200 milliwatts. Just like the CinePro 4K, it's using a sleeve dipole linear antenna, and I have to say I really like this grommet which is needed on this model because it provides stress relief from the micro UFL connector being pulled off in a crash. Then finally we have the Cadex V1 Tarsier board, which is actually hanging from the top plate and isn't connected to the stack. This diamond configuration that they've put it in makes the buttons easier to get at, but the micro SD card is still quite difficult to reach. They have also directly soldered the Tarsier board to the flight controller, so you can't change any of the bottom FPV camera settings as they haven't provided the controller board or the connector in the package. This isn't a problem for me because I like the stock settings, but if you are a 16:9 goggle user, the FPV camera is set to 4:3 mode. And as I've already mentioned, this is the V1 of the Tarsier, but the only change they seem to have made is the lens for the HD camera. It's now a glass lens and has a wider field of view, so if you already have a Tarsier V1, you can go to the Cadex Facebook page and they will send you a free V2 lens for your V1. I was surprised to see GEPRC using 3D printed parts to mount the camera up front. However, the material they have used is not that flexible, so I'll have to make sure I can find a sunny day to see if it causes any jello. The camera also sticks out slightly at the front. Unlike most manufacturers, GEPRC have recommended some LiPo sizes. They say this model should use between a 450 mAh and 550 mAh 3 to 4S LiPo. I'm going to be trying out this Tattoo 450 mAh 4S and a 550 mAh GMB 3S LiPo because they are exactly the same weight, resulting in an all-up weight of 155 grams. They do give you 2 LiPo straps, but unfortunately neither are big enough to fit around the recommended batteries, so I've borrowed this longer one from the CinePro 4K. They have also provided a silicone mat which does its job getting the LiPo above the screws. However, it's really small, so I don't think it's going to be too effective stopping your battery from getting thrown in a crash. Left over in the box is a spare set of the Emax props, an Allen key, some foam strips, as well as the straws and the straw ends, but I don't advise using the straw ends because they come off really quickly. Okay, let's go for a line of sight with a 550 mAh GMB 3S. Already it's feeling heavy, just under 50% throttle to get it to hover. Let's see what it's like, hands off. Yeah, it's not drifting because of noise, just a slight breeze pushing it that way. Yeah, hands off, whichever way I turn it. It goes that way, so no noise coming through to the gyro. Let's see what the punch is like. Yeah, it's not got the most power, this guy. I think this one's going to be more of a cruiser and it's going to be better indoors. I'm going to flick it into acro, but I'm not sure how it's going to react. Oh yeah, it can do acro. Oh, I saw a bit of a wobble there though. Kind of thought that might be the case with this being a dead cat configuration and the props being closer into the frame, and also just all of the weight is in one place, whereas on the CinePro 4K it's spread out over the frame. So I think in general that one is going to fly better than this one. Can also hear the RPMs dying a little bit as well. That's probably something to do with the ESCs being different, you know, 16 by 16 with this one. Oh yeah, definitely losing power. So yeah, I think this one's going to be a cruiser for sure, but it does do acro if you want it to. Okay, this is a Tattoo 450 milliamp 4S. It weighs to the gram the same as the 550 milliamp GMB 3S. Already I'm hearing some slight oscillations, so that extra power already causing problems with the tune. So looks like really this one is going to be a 3S model, whereas the CinePro 4K was definitely a 4S model outdoors and could do 3S indoors. But let's take a look at the punch difference. Do you know what? There's actually not that much difference between 3S and 4S when it comes to power. There's a little bit more there, but again I'm hearing the RPMs die down, so I don't think there's much in it. See if it does. Oh, there we go. Yeah, got a desync. There we go, I went into acro. Let's check the temperature of the motors. Ow! Yeah, too hot to touch for the back ones, and then the front ones not as warm, but warmer than you would like it. So yeah, I don't think this is a 4S guy at all. So let's take a look at some flight footage. The audio that you're hearing is coming from the microphone on the Tarsier camera, and as I'm listening to this back, I can hear some slight oscillations that I couldn't hear when I was flying around myself. This flight was done with the 3S GMB 550 milliamp LiPo. So perhaps the tune isn't quite there either, or there's just a little bit of vibration coming through to the microphone. Either way, it was flying smoothly, and as you can see, I'm actually able to do some acro. It's not perfect though. I am getting some kind of pendulum effect, and again, I think that is because of the weight distribution. I'm just doing a range test here. You can see the RSSI in the 90s. We did get a little bit of flicker of black and white through the camera, but I think that is just the rapid fire module as it's getting it on the way back. So yeah, I'm just in cruising mode here and doing the odd roll, and I'm having to give it a fair bit of throttle in order to give me enough headroom to recover. So yeah, I think this model is just a cruiser. I did do an FPV flight on a 4S LiPo, but I was having to nurse it the entire time, so I think this one is going to be a 3S model only. So into the sun, and surprisingly no jello whatsoever. I think that's the first time I've seen a 3D printed semi-flexible mount used and not get any jello whatsoever. So for the HD footage on the Tarsier, I always use the 1440p mode and then dynamically stretch the image to 16:9 to get that ultra wide field of view. I'm going to have to check out the lens of this V2 to see how much extra field of view that you get. I think the field of view is fine in 1440p mode, but when you go into 4K mode, it crops the image so you get a much narrower field of view. There's a little bit of noise filtering through to the FPV feed, but it's not bad at all. It's nothing I would really complain about. I just thought I would mention it. And with this LiPo, I got a really long flight time. You can see that the voltage has sagged quite a bit, so it went very quickly to 10 volts, but it kind of stayed there. I guess that's because I was just cruising around. One thing I thought was interesting is I've been flying the DJI FPV system a lot around this field lately, and I was really impressed with the Tarsier camera. I thought it was a step up from the Turtle, but when I compare it to the quality of the DJI HD system, then I can see that the image is a little bit soft in comparison, but I still like the image, and this model is more suited for cruising like I'm doing now. I'm doing another range test again, and we're at about 120 meters there, but I think you would get probably half a kilometer easy with this guy, especially if you run it at the higher power output. And it's running pretty smooth as well. Now, when I reviewed the CinePro 4K, that had the F7 flight controller with the dual gyros, and I definitely think that helped when it came to the flight characteristics. But this one is flying okay. As I say, it's just really a cruiser though. So we are over a 4-minute flight time, so yeah, it's got a good flight time on a 3S LiPo. And if you are flying indoors, then you're going to be flying slower and probably not doing acro, so you should get an even longer flight time. But one thing that did happen is the voltage dropped really quickly, and you want to make sure when that happens that you land so that you've got enough time to stop the recording so that it saves it. So I don't quite make it back to the bin. This is a flight done indoors on the same 3S 550mAh GMB LiPo, and I think this is the first time I've flown the Tarsier camera in really low light. Now, of course, the FPV camera isn't going to suffer because it's got a wider dynamic range than the HD camera, but I think the HD footage is suffering. It looks a little bit more washed out than when I have flown it indoors in the daytime, but it's still way better than anything that we had a couple of years ago, so I shouldn't complain. I'm afraid the flight isn't that interesting because we are decorating, so there aren't that many objects to fly around, but it does show you that having that separate FPV camera, you can actually fly a slightly bigger model indoors. I find with the split cameras you still have that slight latency, and when you fly bigger models or even smaller models indoors, you find yourself bumping into more things because it's a little bit more clumsy. You don't have that instant reaction that you have, but here we've got a normal FPV camera and then a HD camera, so they are separated. And I got a really long flight time, I think 5.5 minutes. So I'll leave you with some flying. If you want to spend a little less money than the CinePro 4K and you only really want the model for flying indoors, then this probably suits your needs. But for me, the GEPRC CinePro 4K, it does everything. It does acro freestyle outside very nicely, and it can also be flown indoors and get through the same gaps as this model can. So I'll link to both in the description of this video if you wish to buy one. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
The summer's calling. The summer's calling. If the kingdom is overthrown, meet me at the cornerstone. I know that I can't be without you. This bond is solid gold. We're a diamond and an emerald. It took me forever to find you. 'Cause when it's all over, the love that you give will be there to guide you in every way. Now we've been through the cold and darkest days. The summer's calling. As we wait for the smoke to clear and we watch our dreams appear, I know that we can rise together. This vision that we share is ours. Together we can touch the stars. I know that we will see December. 'Cause when it's all over, the love that you give will be there to guide you in